Tom Cotton from the great state of Arkansas. Follow him on Twitter at Senator at Sen Tom Cotton. Senator, good to have you. Welcome. It's great to have you here.
Good evening, Hugh. Great to be on with you as always.
Congratulations. You made your first speech on the floor of the Senate. I have read it. I had the advanced text. It was all about national defense. I applaud your choice of topic, and it is timely because the House budget resolution is going to be unveiled tomorrow. Do you think it's going to live up to the needs that we have?
Well, thank you, Hugh. I appreciate the kind words. Our military has suffered devastating cuts over the last several years, and it simply now is not ready to meet our nation's challenges because of the level of funding. I hope that the House budget, like the Senate budget, will lift the sequester caps on defense and spend what's necessary for defense. On the floor tonight, I called for $611 billion as a minimum, which is the recommendation of the National Defense Panel, an eminent group of bipartisan national security experts who were convened by Congress to review the quadrennial defense review last year. Senator John McCain and Jack Reed, the chairman and ranking on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Mac Thornberry, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, have all called for at least $577 billion, which would eliminate the sequester entirely. Whatever happens, we simply cannot continue to have these terrible cuts to our military. Currently we're projected to spend only $498 billion, which is on the way to historic lows and certainly doesn't reflect any kind of threat or strategy needed to respond to those threats.
Now, I had some off-the-record conversations with colleagues of yours in the House and the Senate this morning. And I think the public gets confused because the budget resolution is going to say that the cap on defense is going to stay in place, but there's this other account that's going to be useful. I don't really care how we get there if they get the money. What's your opinion, Senator Cotton, on clarity at this point versus a process that's unfolding that you have confidence in getting DOD the money it needs?
Hugh, the budget resolution in both chambers is still a work in progress, and there are different ways to reach the same result. But the result has to be substantial increases in our defense spending. Even if we don't achieve what I called for tonight, which is more than $611 billion, we have to substantially increase our current spending over $498 billion. Again, that's a historic low, and we're sending the Army to levels that we haven't seen since World War II. The Navy to levels not seen since World War I, and the Air Force to levels not seen ever. So we're all in agreement, I believe, at least on the Republican side, and frankly many Democrats, especially those who serve with me on the Armed Services Committee, that we need to increase defense spending substantially. How we get to that as a procedural matter is another point for us to discuss, but I'm committed to making sure that we substantially increase our defense spending.
Well, one of the conversations that I had today was, look, if you folks will come out and just say, we will get there. If the Republicans all line up and say, we have some hoops we have to jump through because of the Sequestration Act of 2011. Our budget resolution is a trampoline to get us there. Do not worry about the specifics of this resolution. We have a plan. We will get there. I think people will relax. I am more afraid that there are some deficit hawks who will come at us with the cliche, which I just heard from a caller, that our national debt is our biggest threat. Now, I know you're concerned about the national debt, so am I, but it's not our biggest threat. Our biggest threat is in Iran and in Russia and in China and in North Korea.
Hugh, you're right that a nuclear Iran is certainly the gravest threat we face to our national security. The debt does, though, undermine our security in the long term, because if you look to Western Europe, there is clearly not a good history of asking Democratic electorates to choose between their pensions, not their children's pensions, but their own pensions, and defense spending. So we want to make sure that we get our long-term debt under control, but the way to do that is not to cut by cutting defense. In fact, that is both counterproductive and impossible. It's counterproductive because ultimately your enemies catch up with you, you have to increase spending, and it costs more to achieve the same state of readiness and modernization as it would have if you hadn't had those cuts. Second, our economic prosperity at home depends heavily on global economic growth, which depends, of course, on stability and order, and that is provided by the United States military. But it's also impossible because the long-term driver of our debt is retirement and health care programs. And if we don't reform those programs, not only will we break the promises we have made to our citizens, but we will also continue to eviscerate our military.
Do you think that entitlement reform is tied up with getting rid of the sequester? Because it seems to me the sequester calls for $500 billion in cuts over the next 10 years. And the DOD has to look out. They have to deal with what the law is, not as we hope it will be. Don't we have to get rid of that this cycle?
I hope we can get rid of the sequester level caps on defense, Hugh. You're right that the Department of Defense has to plan for a very long-term planning horizon. You or I may invest in a home, buy a car, buy a tractor on our farm back in Arkansas. Those are big investments for us, but they're nothing like buying an aircraft carrier or buying a new bomber. Those things take years of development, and the Department of Defense needs the level of funding and the predictability of that funding to make those kind of investments to keep us safe. So I hope that we can eliminate the sequester level caps on the Department of Defense. In the long term, the only way we're going to get our finances in order, the only way we're going to keep the promises that we've made to our citizens are to reform our health and retirement programs.
Have you seen from leadership yet a blueprint on sort of the mechanics of getting to there?
We've had some very early discussions, but those discussions are going to intensify this week and next week as the Senate Budget Committee releases its draft resolution, and we move towards a vote late next week.
All right. Now I want to switch to the blowback from your letter last week. The Cotton Letter is now a thing. You've achieved legislative immortality already in your first 3 months in office. I
Hugh,
hope
let me correct you, Hugh. It's not the Cotton Letter. It is the letter of 47 Republican senators, to include Orrin Hatch, the president pro tem, who took office 4 months before I was born, to include every Republican elected leader, to include every Republican freshman, to include every Republican on the Armed Services Committee, which is a pretty far-reaching cross-threshold of the Republicans in the Senate.
I know, but I would be proud of having it called the Cotton Letter with 46 signatures on it besides your own. I think it's a great thing, and I wonder if you're taking a little bit of pride in the blowback, the hysteria actually directed at it.
Hugh, this is not about pride for me or for what the Senate Republicans did with our letter. This is about stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And Iran's leaders needed to hear crystal clear, without a doubt, from us that if the president does not submit a deal for congressional approval, then Congress does not have to accept a deal. That is a very basic fact of America's Constitution, and I can tell you that Iran's leaders in Tehran were not getting that message from Geneva.
They got it now.
They needed to hear the message.
They did. They heard it, and I'm glad they did. Now I have to turn just to a little bit of politics. This is a tough question. In the first round of the NC2As, I know this is the president, especially not yours, Arkansas and Harvard may face off in the second round. In which case, Tom Cotton will be cheering for who?
Go Hogs, go. Come on, Hugh. Do you really have to ask that question?
Just wanted to make sure that you're as good a politician as you are a defense expert, Tom Cotton.